Welcome again to this coffee lecture on data publication and specifically on publisher requirements. My name is Roman Gerlach. I'm from the research data management team at the University of Vienna, but I'm also the coordinator of the Thuringian Competence Network on Research Data Management. And that being said, we will dive directly into the topic. You probably know that there's a lot of directions and guidance on data publications out there. There's information provided by research organizations like universities, research centers. They have good scientific practices implemented. They have open research policies and alike. And there's also funding organizations that provides information on data publication in open science policies, but also in grant agreements. They do specify things. And the third party involved, the third stakeholder involved are publishers, and they provide information on data publication in their authors' guidelines, but also in data sharing policies and the like. And today, we will take a look at the third line here on the publishers and what they specify in terms of data publication. As a disclaimer, of course, this will not be the full picture. I have picked a few examples and will guide you through that whole topic by those examples. I hope it's still comprehensive enough and picks the right one. The right examples that represent the current state, since that is a very evolving field. If you are from a publisher, I'm very curious to get your feedback and your comments in the end, and perhaps you can add to those things and to the developments. What I present here is what I have found through some research. I found this statement from publishers that have joined forces in the International Association of Scientific, Technical, and Medical Publishers, short STM. They have published a joint statement on research data together with DataCite and Crossref back in 2023, and they have come up with 12 best practices for research data sharing. And in that 12 best practices, they are addressing 6 different stakeholders with different actions. And among them, as you can see here on the right, I hope you can see it, are also researchers. And the first 2 best practices are addressed to researchers. And the first one is to use trustworthy data repositories when publishing results. And the second one is to utilize persistent identifiers when citing data of research. And then there's a lot more for other stakeholders like data repositories, publishers, funders, research organizations, and so forth. The same organization, also STM, has put up a research data program which they have a very simple mantra on, and this is share, link, and cite. And what they mean by that is that an increasing number of journals with data policies and articles have a data availability statement included. This is the sharing part. The link part is increase the number of journals that deposit the data links to Scholix, to the Scholix framework. And the cite part is that journals and publishers should increase the citation to data sets along the Joint Declaration of Data Citation Principles. And you can see here on the right just different logos of the publishers involved in this association. So it's mostly from the technical, scientific, and medical fields. So it's not the entire research fields represented there, but there are some major publishers presenting that. And I'm showing that to indicate that the publishers actually work together to kind of come up with some common requirements, and so that not all the individual publishers and journals have their very individual guidelines and policies in place. So there's some collaboration and some joint efforts here. And now we take a look at some first example of those data sharing policies. It's mostly called data sharing policy, by the way. There are many publishers that I found that have different levels of data sharing policies for their journals. So the journals are to pick one of those levels according to their research field and to the common practice in that research domain, but also in terms of what editors think should be addressed and how data sharing should be managed in those journals. And you can see here, there's, for example, for Wiley, they have 4 different levels. And the first one is the weakest one. It encourages data sharing. And in terms of data availability statement, this means that the presence or absence of data should be confirmed. And the question, do I need to share my data? It is an optional thing. It's not a mandatory thing. And will my data be peer reviewed? This is the third column here in that table. It will be also optional. And you can go through, and it has increasing demands on researchers. So the second level is it is expected that data is being shared. The third level is then it mandates data sharing. And the fourth level adds to the mandating even the peer review of the data. And in that fourth level, researchers publishing in that journal with that data sharing policy are also required to share data, of course, but also required to have a peer review on that data. Of course, it will be managed by the journals and the editors, but these are the different levels. And you can find those different levels with different publishers, as far as I could see. And they adopted similar things with that level. Sometimes it's only 3 levels, but in this case, it's 4 levels. And yeah, regarding that talk, I would like to address the following 4 questions. The first one is, what do these policies say about the kind of data to publish, then where to publish, when to publish things, and also how to publish. Some of the things we have addressed already, and let's get started with what data to publish. And there are certain types of data that are mandated data types, so-called. And for these, there are community-endorsed public repositories, and the publication of data of those types are mandatory. And among those are mostly things from the bioinformatics field or biomedicine field, so sequencing data. They have very established ways of data publication, and you won't be able to get a paper published without publishing the data in those repositories. Then, on the other hand, for all the other kinds of data, I took a look at some other publishers' guidelines, and here you can find statements like those two from Decruta and Wiley. They're quite similar, and they say that any data that were generated by authors to produce the results, so-called primary data, that should be made publicly available. They also mentioned that it should be accompanied by rich metadata, for example, with README files. And Wiley is also encouraging data sharing, and they also specify that even raw data, process data, software, algorithm, protocols, methods, and materials could be shared or should be shared. And they also provide a tool, so-called author compliance tool, where you can check whether the journal that you have selected complies with different regulations, or actually what kind of regulations you have to comply with, so this way. There's also other types of data where there's, of course, restrictions on so-called third-party data, and in the data policy from PLOS, you find these statements here. So if you have third-party data and you are, as an author, are not allowed to share anything, then of course this is an exception where you don't need to share anything. And the same is true for human research participant data and other sensitive data, where there's also no obligation to share that. But as you can see here, authors must provide some additional information. They need to explain the restrictions in detail, why it's not possible, and they should provide contact information to the Data Access Committee or some ethics committee that can further help with the restrictions. That being said, we move on to where to publish data. And yeah, there, I think it's more like a recap for most people. There are traditionally 3 different ways to publish data. The first one is as a supplement to scientific journals. And the second one is with dedicated data journals. And the third one is in data repositories. And I think most people nowadays talk about data repositories, and also the data that is described in data journals is mostly physically provided to data repositories and then linked to data journals. I don't think there's many data journals that have their own data repository to hold the data. So these are the 3 different options that have been in place for quite some time. But let's take a look what the data sharing policies state nowadays. And I found this example from De Groote, which talks about supplementary material. And they specifically discourage the use of supplementary materials in that publication. So the first option that I've shown is not recommended by De Groote. But authors are encouraged to ensure that their data sets are deposited in publicly available repositories and presented in the main manuscript. So if you are able to put everything into the manuscript, some research domains that might be possible, then this is an option. Otherwise, they really encourage people to use repositories instead of supplementary material. And yeah, also from De Groote, there's a statement in their policies regarding data repositories. This is the preferred mechanism for sharing data. And they provide 3 different options where to search for a data repository. Re3Data is one of them, fairsharing.org is another one, and the repository finder by DataCite is the third one. And those recommendations to look for repositories are mostly part of many of the policies that I've seen. That's a very common advice to address the where to publish. Of course, researchers, when they try to publish things, should also consult the funder's policy requirements and also those of the research organization. And discipline-specific community-recognized repositories are usually more recommended as the first choice. And then if that's not available or not possible, then people should look for general purpose repositories such as Dryad, Figshare, Zenodo, and so on. And the last point here in the last sentence is they also strongly recommend certified repositories. In this case, they recommend CoreTrust Seal, although there's also other certificates available. There are also journal-specific recommendations, and usually each journal has an individual policy on that. And for this is an example of a very domain-specific recommendation. They even specify very specific repositories for that particular domain here in this case. And with that, I will move on to when to publish data. And there, if you look at the guidelines, they usually say something rather vague. So Springer Nature, for example, has a statement that says authors are strongly encouraged to make supporting data available as early as possible while respecting research community norms and funder and institutional policies. Then there is usually they refer to the option that the repositories do provide the opportunity to deposit things without making it publicly available, giving also reviewers the access to data sets before it's actually published. And I think this is also true for many repositories. And in that case, the deposit is before the actual submission of the manuscript. And another example from Wiley on the same topic. The first sentence is almost the same as with Springer Nature. And the other parts are also have very similar information. They refer again to the mandated data sharing data sets that we have talked about earlier. And authors should confirm the policy of their target journal prior to submission. They should take a look and be sure what the policy says on when to publish. And going to the next part, the question on how to publish. This is something, there's a slide that I've taken from the NFDI for bioimage. It's still, I think, quite common that people like to do or like to have this option that data is available upon request, but what that means is depicted in this this image. I hope that's not the common option anymore, and I think we are moving away from that. And looking at the how things should be published, for example, Springer Nature has a very clear statement that all original articles must include a data availability statement. So this is really a mandatory thing. And what that data availability statement is on this slide. It shows the, let's say, the lower part of a research paper. It's just a random paper, just to take an example. And what you usually have is this kind of paragraph here that says where the data set can be found, which includes also the links, and also has some additional context information included there. And if you want to take a look at the guidelines for publishers, again, from that STM association, they expect data availability statements to be a simple, consistent way to provide a human readable information within an article. So that should be information that is in front of any paywall, that should be visible before you actually have to go through the paywall. And it should include a statement that the data exists, the information where data can be found. It should include the persistent identifiers. It should include common names, identifiers of repositories and the institution, and also should include the licensing restrictions and access requirements. And they also say what it shouldn't include, and this is it shouldn't refer to the reference list without context, and also should not state that all data are in the results section. In many cases, and also as a requirement, this whole thing should be machine readable if it's correctly marked up by the publishers. So it's not something that you do as a researcher. And on the other hand, in addition to the data availability statement, we have the data citation. And a data citation complements a data availability statement, but they are distinct entity equivalent to a bibliographic reference. So again, this should be in front of any paywall. It should not be behind the paywall. And it should use the Scholix framework to expose data to literature links, increasing the visibility of articles and research data. And the data citation is quite similar to any other citation of a manuscript or journal article. It should include author, dataset title, location, year of publication, and persistent identifier. And it should not show only the URL. It should have also the additional information that I mentioned before. And the best practice that is recommended nowadays is to have both together, both the data availability statement and the reference list citation in your manuscript, to be sure that the context is provided in the DAS statement, but also it is part of the reference list and also part of the sort of accounting within the bibliographic systems. And this looks like, as an example, may look like this. You have a paper on top. Again, it's a random paper. And in that paper, you have the data availability statement. And that statement contains a number of referenced data sets. And these data sets are provided with their URL and specifically the persistent identifier, that is the URL. And there's links then to the actual data sets, which are in Pangea in this example. And there's also even a statement that the last sentence here, if you read that one data set is currently waiting for the publication into the Pangea database. So even if things are not yet there, you can mention that in the data publication. All right. There's other examples from Wiley, for example. There's also things like a data reporting checklist that's being provided. That's very discipline specific, of course, and it may not be the very common way of describing the data publication. I would like to include that here as a reference. And with that, I'm already at the end of this presentation, and I would provide you some take-home messages. So first, data publication is, in my opinion, increasingly expected or required by publishers. This has evolved quite heavily over the past years, I would say. Data should be published in trustworthy repository is a term that I have seen a number of times. And of course, trustworthiness can be provided by certification of repositories. And the third one is the data availability statements and data citation are the best practice at this time, at this point in time. Finally, I think there's still a large variety among research disciplines and their individual journals. So this is also why they have different data sharing levels, different sharing policies. I didn't find any statistics on how many journals per publisher are really following a certain level. I didn't see that, but maybe someone else has a link to that. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any question.